I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. I have a quick announcement before we get started. I have a new book out, and it's totally free for my listeners. And you know what? I'm not even publishing this book on Amazon. I just think this is really valuable. I want you guys to read it, and I want to give it to you. It's called The Side Hustle Bible. I wrote this book because the economy is changing. You need side hustles to break the barriers of corporate America and live the life of freedom that we all want to live, to choose yourself. I love the idea of trying lots of things to make money and seeing what works and what doesn't. And this book is a collection of proven opportunities, 177 to be exact, to turn your hobby or existing skills into an entirely new source of income. That's why I called it the Side Hustle Bible. All you have to do is go to www.jamesfreebooks.com. That's www.jamesfreebooks.com. Each method has the potential to move you closer to that new car, new house, or vacation. These strategies are tested and proven. But don't take my word for it. You will see in the chapters. Go to jamesfreebooks.com to see how others have created a profitable side hustle with this free book. All these people took action on just one of the ideas in this book. I'm excited about what this book can do for people. I hope you let me know what it does for you, or I love to hear results. Claim your free copy of the Side Hustle Bible today before they're gone. The first step is grabbing your free copy by going to www.jamesfreebooks.com.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Look how hard it is to change fields. The hardest sell is how do you convince somebody that you're not what you've been for, decades, or that you have more to offer. So I came in through sort of the side entrance.
Which I think is a very good technique. I think people underestimate the back door or the side entrance.
So one of the things I learned about what makes news and what makes people care is that if you're doing something really well, there's no news story there. But if you do it a different way, that's immediately gets people's attention. And they say, oh, a new thing. Finally, there's a new thing. Let's talk about the new thing.
So, Scott Adams, creative Dilbert, I think this is the third time you're on my podcast.
I feel honored.
This is the first time we're meeting in person also.
I know, this will be a completely different experience. The first time you were literally in a closet.
I was in a closet, yes.
Yeah. An actual closet, not a figurative one.
Right. I made a closet like my soundproof room because I was living in a place where a train was always going by. But you had the sense, let's do it on video. You were one of the first podcasts where even though I was in the closet, we did it on video so we could kind of get those visual cues face to face. But now we're in person. We'll get all of them.
Yeah.
So obviously people know you. You created Dilbert. Would you say it's the most popular syndicated cartoon right now in a dying industry?
Well,
Newspapers?
it might be. I think Garfield still might be in as many or more newspapers. And then popularity is hard to measure. Is it the one that sells the most calendars, or the ones that, it's hard to measure.
I feel when I worked in a corporate environment, Dilbert was the strip that was always taped to people's cubicles the most.
I will claim that as a comic strip, it's the most popular for an adult audience. Right?
Yeah.
Because if you go for, Garfield is mostly for the younger set. And Peanuts was as well. Peanuts was a little more universal, but that's
Doonesbury.
That's yeah, those are, Doonesbury never was as big as Dilbert. It was as famous, but it wasn't as big in newspapers.
And but really, first off, we're here to talk about your book that just came out, Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. Your point throughout the book is that there's this two-dimensional world of people who are arguing all over the media and social media where it's like, no, this is the fact. No, this is the fact. But your whole thing is facts don't matter. You can't convince anybody of anything really using rational reasoning. That's the 2D world. And then the 3D world is the world where persuaders live that actually understand how to convince either one-on-one or large numbers of people to support their cause. And what's created some infamy for you, I would say more infamy than fame in a weird way, but you predicted Trump's election almost the day he announced his candidacy. So he had 18 opponents for the Republican nomination, and then he still had the general election to go. And at that point already, you were saying Trump is a master persuader. You had taken hypnotism lessons and considered yourself a very good persuader. And you said, this is the only candidate I see using master persuasion skills. And so you, on that basis alone, you predicted Trump's eventual win.
I predicted that he was, as I like to say, bringing a flamethrower to a stick fight, and the sticks didn't see it coming, because he had a set of tools that were insanely impressive, but also a little bit invisible, which was the fun part. Because if you look at his talent stack, as I like to say, the number of things he can do really well, but not the best in the world, not even better than people he was running against. You could say, well, he's not the smartest person in the race, but he's really smart.
Right.
He's not the best public speaker, but he's really good. He's not the funniest person you've ever met, but he's really funny. He's not the best, maybe he might not be the best negotiator you've ever met, but he certainly knows how to negotiate. And you can just keep going down the line, and he's sort of a A-, B+, or A, at this whole range of things from reality TV to business. And he brought the whole package, and I didn't see anybody who I thought could compete with him.
Well, there's two directions I want to go on the talent stack issue. And we talked about talent stack on our last podcast, but I just want to summarize it. And I want to summarize it in the form of you with Dilbert. Just basically, it's a combination of skills where you might not be the best, but you're pretty good. But the combination of them makes you the best in the world at the intersection, roughly.
Right. So in the case of cartooning, nobody would call me a great artist, but I can draw a picture that you know what it's supposed to be. I'm certainly not the best writer. I'm not the funniest person, even in this room.
I doubt that. I don't know about that.
But there are very few people who have all those three skills, plus have some business experience, can write short sentences that people want to read. So there might be about a dozen different micro skills that come together to make Dilbert work. And if you took one or two of them out, it would all fall apart.
I love the phrase micro skills because I think people look at peak performers from afar and say, oh, Tiger Woods is a great golfer, or Michael Jordan was a great basketball player, or Scott Adams is a great cartoonist. But really, there's no meta skill called basketball. It's 1,000, or not 1,000, but it's like 20 to 100 micro skills that are kind of exclusive of each other. You know, like Michael Jordan had to be good at shooting hoops from a certain distance, and he also had to be good at running around the basketball court and avoiding other people. It's two completely different skills from each other. But he had to be the best in the world at both to be the best in the world at the intersection.
Yeah, and at that level, he had to make sure there were no holes. So you had to have a game with no holes. Michael Jordan's probably one of the most complete athletes we've ever seen.
But I wonder if this is like, would you say this is like a shortcut on the 10,000 hour rule? And even on Anders Ericsson says this is not necessarily a fixed rule, but you know, a lot of people say you have to do a certain number of time to be the best at something. But I feel like using the talent stack appropriately, you could shortcut.
I always think of it not so much as shortcut, but as another strategy. So if you were born with the talent to be the best piano player, the best golfer in the world, you probably get noticed really early. You know, you're 5 years old and somebody's already saying, "Did you see that? Did you see what that 5-year-old just did? Give him a golf club right now." But if you're not one of those, if you're not obviously just a prodigy with some, you know, let's say hand-eye coordination or your musical skill or something, the other way for normal people who just are hardworking and pretty good and, you know, willing to put in the effort is to build a stack of talents that other people don't have and one that has a commercial value.
I think your book has so much more value just on a personal level. Like I'm reading this book to figure out how I could be more persuasive in my life, whether it's through business or relationships or, you know, other activities I'm trying to master. So, I mean, this is a book about how to really kind of take control of a situation so that you move up to the 3D world, and so you can see the 2D world for what it is, and then what directions you should take in the 3D world. Whether you're selling a business, getting good at a new skill like a stand-up comedy, which I'm trying to get good at, or I don't know, winning an election or selling a customer.
Yeah, let me give you an example just with the title of the book. So a lot of people saw the title and they said, "Win bigly." No, Trump doesn't say bigly. He says big league. He just says it quickly and it sounds like bigly. And other people say, "No, I looked it up in the dictionary. There's a word, bigly. It's just not often used." And what I say is, you both just remembered the name of my book. All right, so that was all I was trying to get. So I injected a little bit of wrongness into the title intentionally so that the people who were, you know, arguing the details and the rightness and the wrongness of it would go away remembering it. And so that's the 3D world, I call it.
And I think, I mean, part of your point is that Trump did this quite a bit during his campaign. Sometimes he would take extreme points of view, often making statements that he may or may not have known were inaccurate, just to kind of now everyone's debating, oh, that was true, that wasn't true. But what they're really talking about all along is Trump. It's like you say, he drew all the oxygen out of the room from the other candidates by making these wildly inaccurate statements. Again, he may or may not have known them to be inaccurate. It doesn't even matter because, like you say, facts don't matter. His goal at that point was if something was on TV, it wanted to be him.
Yeah, and you know, I was saying early on in the process that the facts wouldn't matter to decisions. Obviously, a fact matters. If you walk off a cliff, you die. All right, so outcomes matter. But when I was watching now President Trump as a candidate, just making people crazy with his factual inaccuracies, I think PolitiFact had just page after page of this tweet is not accurate, this tweet is not accurate. But there was one thing that they all had in common. Not just that they all got your attention because they were inaccurate in many cases, but because all the energy is sucked toward him and he's got your attention and it's a little bit wrong, but you look back and it never mattered and all of his wrongness was in the right direction. So in other words, the things that he said were inaccurate still were a sale for the thing he wanted, which was generally good for the country if you were of that you know, the conservative mind, I guess. You would see him using that on really every topic. People would argue about the specific detail of what he said, but the direction of what he was trying to promote was a lot more compatible. People would say, yeah, you know, maybe the gun deaths in Chicago are not as bad as he's saying. Maybe people are not being gunned down every time they walk outside with their baby carriage, but it's really bad, and something needs to be done about all the violence. I can't think of an example where he said something that was inaccurate and also he was trying to persuade in a bad direction.
You say in many cases, he stakes out the claim at the extreme and then is later able to back off to appear to be more centrist. But the direction there was the same that he still believes. And it's enough to say half the country is going to say he's ridiculous, half is going to get afraid of Border Patrol, and he stays in the news.
Yeah, if you look at how much I would say discipline it took for him not to clarify every time he talked about his wall, that it really would have to be a patchwork of solutions based on the terrain, and some things would be first, and you don't really need it in these parts. And he did say that, I think, at least once during the campaign, but he very wisely kept with, it's just going to be a wall, because it's simple, it's visual. He repeated it. I mean, these are like
simple, visual. He repeated it over and over.
Yeah. And again, the error of it, when people said, it can't possibly be a full wall all the way, you're not going to do that, they were still talking about him building the wall. He was making them think past the sale. They'd already decided that this was an important question. They were spending their time on it. They were debating it. And, before the election, I never even heard this issue.
Did he create the issue or did he pull for the issue? That was a little unclear to me. Even in the book, you're sort of debating this.
Well, immigration was an issue with a lot of his supporters. And one of the things that he was good at, and I guess you could say this is part of his talent stack, is that he did figure out what people cared about, which is really, really hard. Because if it were easy, more people would do it. Hillary Clinton's policies were sort of lawyerly, and they probably made sense, and maybe they added up, and they were compatible with her base and stuff, but they didn't have any emotional content. They just sort of laid there. And if you think back, it wasn't that long ago, but try to think of anything that was one of her policies, and it's hard.
You talk in the book about maybe it was almost a last-ditch effort for her, but her wanting to raise estate taxes. But what I really remember with her is two things. The I'm with her slogan, which you compare against Make America Great Again. And you had this theory that he was going to somehow create a situation where it would seem as if he's running unopposed, which is what happened. But this is all the weeds of the election, and we'll get to all of them. I wanted to kind of go over, you have, when you started getting involved in hypnosis, you have this list of hypnosis superpowers, which I guess anytime we sort of try something like hypnosis or anything, the first thing we think of is, what am I going to get out of this? What special thing that nobody else has? And maybe it kind of stemmed from some insecurity. Like your second thing here, you have lie detection and romance. So is your first two things as hypnosis superpowers? Were you worried at that time that people were lying to you and that you weren't getting enough romance, and so that's why you signed up for a hypnosis course?
I signed up for hypnosis because I was deeply influenced by my mother. She had an experience with a hypnotist. My family doctor was a hypnotist as well, and hypnotized her to give birth to my little sister. And my mother's version of it, and again, I don't know how accurate it was, but this is the story she told, that she was hypnotized to give birth, and she remembers the whole thing, but felt no pain and used no painkillers. Now, who knows if that's completely true?
Because it could be placebo effect.
Well, that would be hypnosis, essentially, right, because the placebo had been applied in this case. It wasn't accidental.
I feel like right there you just used a hypnosis technique against me. I feel like you did the you win either way. Either she was hypnotized, so actually she felt no pain, or if it was placebo effect, okay, that's hypnosis too.
Well, the placebo effect is, your mind controlling your body, and that's what the hypnotist was trying to do. So in this specific case, I'm not sure there's a distinction.
Yeah. So that influenced you, obviously. But there must have been something more. It wasn't like you were giving birth. You must have had some other issues in life that you said, you know what, hypnosis is going to make these issues better for me.
It was really part of building my talent stack. I also majored in economics in college, and it has a lot more to do with hypnosis than you think. Because economics, when you take the math out, is about why do people do what they're doing. Like, what are their incentives? What's their rational decision making? And you fairly quickly learn that people are just not rational. And so I'm entering this confusing world as a young man, and I'm trying to figure it out. Because I think the better I understand my world, the more effective I'll be to get whatever I want. And so I wanted to understand the irrational part of people, and hypnosis seemed like a good pathway to that. So I didn't know at the time how powerful it would be in terms of my worldview. So what it didn't do is give me powers to hypnotize people on the spot. I suppose I could if I wanted to, but that really wasn't why I took it. What it did give me was a completely different view of how humans operate. And the specific thing was, before taking hypnosis, I thought, well, people are rational most of the time, it seems to me. I feel like I'm rational most of the time, but every once in a while, you get a little crazy. Maybe 10% of the time you're emotional and you get a little crazy. The hypnotist turns it around and says 90% of the time, you just think you're being rational, but you're making an irrational decision and you're rationalizing it after the fact. Now, if you think that's sort of just a philosophical, little distinction that's just sort of fun but has no impact on the real world, try to figure out anything that's happening in the world with the people are rational model, and then compare it to the people are not rational, they're just rationalizing, and see which one explains their world better.
Well, what would be a great example where it really seems like people are rational?
Well, let me give you the perfect distinction. In a rational world, the better candidate should get 80% of the vote, right? But it's always about 50-50, running for president anyway, because people just say, hey, my party is this party, that's their candidate. Everything he says, everything she says is, genius. And everything the other side says is a lie. And in their hearts, they're horrible people. I don't know why they say such things. And if you look at, just today, I had a long extended Twitter conversation with someone whose observation of the same set of facts was completely different from mine. And we were looking at the same stuff and concluding completely different things. Now, before taking hypnosis, I would have said, this gentleman is just lying to me. He knows I'm right, or I'd think, we're looking at the wrong facts. But in this case, we were actually literally looking at the same set of facts. And I would think, well, maybe he's dumb. Like, this is the only way in the 2D world where people are rational, the only way you could explain an interaction like I had today with such a disagreement from the same set of facts is one of us is dumb or lying or we're broken in our souls, all right? And it turns out...
that's very poetic, actually, to describe irrational behavior. We're broken in our souls.
Yeah, but there's got to be some rational reason why we don't see the same situation the same way. The hypnotist looks at it and says, oh, you're both just hallucinating. You're probably both wrong. The truth may be somewhere else. It might be in the middle. But your certainty has nothing to do with reality.
Well, it's interesting because let's take, as outside the realm of politics, although it's related, the realm of religion, it's sort of like, what stories did you grow up listening to? So your parents, your teachers, your spiritual leaders might have told you all about Catholicism, or they might have told you all about Hinduism, or they might have told you all about Judaism. So you grow up from age of 1 on thinking these things, and then that kind of, sort of more storytelling sort of morphs into the facts that you're willing to work with.
All you need to know about religion is that people almost always adopt the religion that they were born into. Some people change.
And same thing with political party.
Yeah, pretty much. That alone tells you that there's not a rational decision-making happening, because they think they're all making rational decisions. You could ask anybody at any religion, and they'll tell you, oh yeah, I looked at those other ones, and they must just be wrong. This one's the smart one.
Yeah, and so it seems like what a persuader does, the 3D world, is sort of understands that and figures out how to, and you describe all the different techniques, but figures out how to use that to persuade. So let's say you believe sinning will make you go to hell. So in the 2D world, everybody's trying to rationalize what's a sin and what's not. In the 3D world, you're trying to persuade somebody. You would sort of make an analogy or associate some activity with sinning.
Well, I would I would use fear in that case.
Fear,
so
right.
If you sin, you go to the bad place. And if you don't, you go to the good place forever. It's forever. It's the worst fear you could have, of suffering forever. So yeah, fear is usually the top persuasive technique.
But you have to kind of take an activity that you want to persuade about. Like, let's say you're in a business meeting. You can't automatically say, if you don't buy my company, you're going to hell. You have to kind of sort of step them there using some of your other techniques, like, let's say, analogies or association or whatever. You know, I don't know how you would do it. Like, how would you think about it if you were trying to sell a company? And,
Well,
I'm not necessarily saying you have to convince somebody they're sinning, but it seems like that's such a persuasive idea. Going to hell is so scary.
Right. Well, every situation is different, but in general, you're trying to create the biggest contrast between the bad choice you don't want them to make and the good choice. And if you're doing it well, you're being very visual about both the good choice and the bad choice. The bad choice should be just flat out scary. You want it to be scary and visual. Ideally, maybe it's related to some fear they've already had, something that they have a real experience with, so they conflate that fear that they've had with this future thing that they want to avoid. And then on the plus side, where you want them to choose, it's all goodness and light and optimism. And you also want to play to people's aspirations. Who do you want to be? This is sort of the Jesus method, right? So Jesus wasn't about, hey, be like this or I'll give you a penalty. He was more about, be this better person, come to the high ground, be the best that a human can be. Watch my example. So aspirations are very, very powerful on the pro side, and fear works really well on the other side.
So let's just give it a random example. Well, it's not totally random. Let's say you've built this organization around Dilbert, all right? So let's say, this Dilbert's so uniquely tied to you that it would be hard for you to sell that company, Dilbert Inc. But let's say you were going to try to, and you're in a room full of people at a media company. What would be a way you might use persuasion techniques to sell Dilbert Inc.? Assuming, by the way, that you would have to remain involved, so we'll take that problem off the table.
I would first learn something about the people I was selling to, and I'd find something they cared about. Now, if I found somebody who was the decision maker who said, I've got this lifelong love of comics and, I've been following comics forever, you probably have already made the sale. There may be some haggling on price, but the person came into the meeting, wanting to buy. If they came in saying, I'm not into comics too much, but I heard this might be a good economic opportunity, just make the meeting quick. You're not selling anything in that meeting.
Really? So you can't persuade them economically, like your media organization might go down in flames if...
I think most people walk into a room with a decision made. Now, that's not to say that you can't persuade people, but if you look at the Trump example, the country was going to be somewhat split down the middle, and people weren't going to move no matter what. So the whole game was 18 months to move 2% of the country, and he had the tools to do that. So, when you go into this business meeting, it's sort of the same situation. You'd have to count on most people can't be moved, and there's nothing you can do about it, especially in a limited time, and especially in an artificial setting where you don't have, the ability to establish, any kind of influence over them before they get there.
So like in a small group of people, where again, like they might have already, half might have a decision, half might have another decision, and you don't have that much, and you're limited in time. Persuasion techniques, this might be the one area where persuasion techniques don't really work as well.
Yeah, the time is the big determinant. It's probably one of the biggest factors in persuasion. There's the skill of the persuader, and then there's how much time do you have. If you give me infinite time, I can convince you of anything, right? I don't even think there's any limit to that. It sounds like a crazy absolute when I say that, but it's sort of the Stockholm syndrome situation where, the captive starts to side with the people who captured the person, which seems like the least likely thing that could ever happen. But they have lots of time. You check back in 2 years and suddenly the prisoners are thinking that they're the guards, if that's what the persuasion was for.
In an election, though, it's like you said, you only have to really persuade
I mean, if you look at every election in history, it's usually won by 2 or 3% of the popular vote, or the electoral vote, or whatever. So you only have to be able to sway, let's say, or be confident that you could sway 5% of the population, and you're going to win. And persuasion techniques work great there. Or I feel you're also saying, and in this book, you say, I think one-on-one persuasion works very well.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with picking the target, right? There are some people who just won't be persuaded. There's just nothing you can do. But if you've got the right person and they're close to on the fence, or the most important thing is, do they have any objection to what you're selling? If they have no objection and you've got a little time, then your odds are pretty good.
But there's even techniques if they have an objection. There's what you later call the fake because. So like Hillary kept trying to say Trump's like Hitler, and your point was Trump's not like Hitler because he's a master persuader. So you have to have like kind of a valid because, but you sort of switch the discussion.
Yeah, the because that idea comes from Robert Cialdini's book Influence, in which they did a study and they got people to cooperate just by saying because, and it didn't matter what came after because, which was the finding. That just the word because made people think, well, there's a reason here somewhere. Okay. But I think probably there are just some people who are willing to do whatever they're asked and some people are not. And that's probably the difference between whether the because worked or not.
Yeah, well, I remember some tweets you did. This is like years ago. You should buy my book because my book is for sale.
Yeah, I was doing that because my readers were sort of they knew about the because method, so I was using it on them with sort of a wink, and I did it over and over again so they could see the different forms of it and how ridiculous they could be. It didn't matter what came after because, but then it became sort of a running joke,
right?
And then the joke was the sale more than the because.
Again, before the persuasion, we start with you going to hypnosis class decades ago to learn these basic skills. And then throughout the book, by the way, you do say you're a trained hypnotist because you're using repetition and social proof to establish your credibility. But there's another technique that you use throughout the book, and I've also seen this in your videos. You always repeatedly say, if a scientist disagrees with me, listen to the scientist. Or when you did that video on blockchain, on Bitcoin and blockchain, which I saw recently, you say, hey, I'm no expert on this, but I'm going to explain it. But if somebody else says differently, listen to them. You have this kind of self-deprecating way of both couching yourself as an expert, but then basically saying, but if a higher expert, ambiguous, not named, says something different, then listen to them.
There's actually more technique in that than it seems. It's actually pacing the audience. So if I anticipate that that's what the audience is going to be thinking, I say it first. And if you can say what people are thinking before they've said it, you just say it while it's in their head, it's very powerful. It bonds you to them and they go, oh, okay, we two people think alike. And then if you get them thinking alike enough, then you can lead them. So they'll easily go where someone who thinks like them is going, but they won't go where somebody's completely different, their enemy. If that person wants them to go somewhere, they're just automatically resistant. So, for example, in the Periscope streaming video in which I talked about blockchain, nobody's going to turn on a cartoonist, hypnotist Periscope about blockchain and think, well, here's the expert. So right off, every single person is thinking, what do you have to offer? And so I answer that question first. It's like, my knowledge is about a 2, but most of the people signing in were at a 0. So I was actually an easy on-ramp.
And it's also an interesting filter in that for people, after you say that, some people, if we lived in the 2D world, people would say, okay, well, I'm turning this video off and I'm turning on the video of the scientist who knows everything about blockchain. But if people continue watching, now cognitive dissonance takes place. Well, I've continued to watch after he's already said he might not be the world's greatest expert, and I'm watching for a reason, so I must trust that he's an expert on this.
Yeah, and there's also a benefit to underselling. So, in other words, if I say, well, I don't know too much about this material, but then I prove otherwise because I do a presentation that does show some knowledge, people are going to be talking themselves into, well, this guy knows a lot more than he's letting on. So you let people come to their own conclusion that maybe you're better than you've said, because that works way better than saying, I'm pretty awesome, let me show you, and then people just click off because they want to reflexively, they want to prove you wrong, so they're going to be listening to prove you wrong.
I feel like this is similar to the Ben Franklin technique, where he had an enemy in the Pennsylvania legislature, and he figured, how can I get this guy on my side? So he didn't try to convince the guy. He basically said, can I borrow a book from you? He knew the guy had a big book collection. He said, can I borrow this one particular book from you? The guy lent him the book. A week later, Benjamin Franklin returned it. And then the guy was always his friend after that. Because his mind thinks to himself, oh, if I'm the type of person who will lend Benjamin Franklin a book, I must like him.
Yeah, if you can get somebody to do you a small favor, they're more likely to do you a larger one. And if the small one is just sort of trivial, it's like, yeah, take the book, bring it back. That does set somebody up to think, well, we are two people who have, a history now. We've done a transaction. It was good. It worked out for both of us. So yeah, that can go a long way.
It's interesting. I had on the podcast recently the two women who wrote the book, The Rules. Remember that book, The Rules, about dating?
Right.
And they say the woman, particularly on the first date or two, should not travel to where the man lives. Like, let's say a woman lives in Brooklyn and the man lives in Manhattan. The woman should not travel to Manhattan because now she's done a favor for the man. The man has done nothing yet for her, and so it skews the whole balance of power in this.
Well, the way I would put that is they're trying to define their value, and we all have in our heads, okay, if I go to your office, you must be the important one because otherwise you would have come to my office. So in any context, we have this sense of who's the important one based on who's meeting you halfway, who's going more than halfway, and that sort of thing. So that's how I would see that situation.
Okay, but I want to get to these hypnosis superpowers, and then we'll get into the election. You talk about lie detection as your first thing, and what would be? I mean, I always think with lie detection, if I ask someone a question directly and they don't quite answer, they sort of answer, but they don't quite answer it means they're lying. So if I say to you, "Where were you last night?" and you say, "Oh, I was out with my friends." You didn't actually answer the question, where were you? So I assume there's some lie somewhere in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, none of this is 100% reliable, right? But you would be right to have a little flag go off in your head to say, oh, that was a little bit of avoidance. But I'll give you the most classic example of this is if you say to somebody, did you murder Bob, Tuesday? The person who's innocent says, what the hell are you talking about? Of course I did not murder Bob. That's crazy. Then they might ask you, where do you even hear that?
Yeah, or why would you think that?
The liar says, where did you hear that? Because they need to know what you know to craft their lie. Because they, if you have them, if they're just dead to rights, then they're going to have to retreat to, well, he had it coming or something. But if they don't know anything and they're just guessing, then the liar's going to say, nope, I wasn't there. So as soon as somebody says, how did you know that? Why are you saying that? Without denying it first, that's just a huge red flag.
What's another lie detection thing?
So within the hypnotist realm, one of the skills you learn is looking at very small changes in a person. Because in the hypnosis context, you're looking at it to see if what you're doing is relaxing them. But you become very observant to small changes. So if you see anything that looks out of place, that should be a flag. So a classic example is that if somebody smiles with their mouth, but their eyes don't look smiley, that's a fake smile, and there may be some intent to deceive you there, even if it's just trying to sell you something and acting smiley. So if you see anything that's incongruent, that just doesn't look like the natural thing that somebody would be doing in that specific situation, that just raises a flag.
I feel like there's a whole book just in that.
Well, there is. I think other people have written it. And here again would be a case where, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm more like the hypnotist is probably a solid 5 to a citizen's 2 compared to, let's say, an FBI or law enforcement, professional who just does this all the time. Maybe they're 9 and 10. But having a 5 as a skill of detecting lies is pretty powerful.
Right, because again, you're adding it to the talent stack of your other persuasion techniques. And again, persuasion, I'll view it as a meta skill filled with all these micro skills. So lie detection, one of them. Now, your next section in this hypnosis superpowers is romance. Obviously, this must have been on your mind when you were. It's on everybody's mind anyway when they're young. And when I don't know how old you were when you took this hypnosis class, but how has your romance life changed? Directly because of taking a hypnosis class?
Well, first of all, let me put some distance between what I'm talking about and some people know about a book called The Game, and the concept of negging or saying something negative to the woman and then she tries harder apparently. So I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about just general, how do you make anybody like you, whether it's romance or not? And I'll give you just a concrete example. There are lots of people who will walk into a room and start talking about their problems. And in their head, they're just thinking, well, I'm sharing. This is what happened to me today. 7 bad things happened to me. So they're just talking about it. Now, even if it's your best friend is going to be, after a while, just worn down by the negativity and just will want to spend less time with you. Compare that to, let's say you're meeting a new person. You're trying to impress them. It's somebody you'd like to be romantically involved with. Let's say the first thing that you said to them was, hey, do you have any nice vacations planned? When can you recommend a good vacation? I'm thinking of going on one. Their mind will immediately go to their favorite vacation. That you'll take them back to the beach. It was that great time. They'll start laughing, and you'll ask them questions. It's something easy to talk about. Vacations, everybody can talk about vacations. And suddenly, the only impression they have of you, because you just met, is all these great feelings.
Right. So there's a subtlety there. Instead of saying, instead of being the first thing you say, oh, I had a great, wonderful day today, which would be another way of creating positive emotion, you go one step further, which is, what's a vacation you would recommend? So rather than them thinking just about your great day, they're suddenly thinking of like Santorino or something, like this thing that viscerally happened to them.
Yeah, ultimately no one cares about other people's inner thoughts, but they really care about their own. So you need to lead them to think about their own good thoughts.
I want to learn more. What's another question I should ask?
Well, generally you want to show interest. So here's a little superpower trick. If you're chatting someone up and you're trying to think, I can't tell, are they just being friendly because it's a friendly person, or is there genuine like romantic sexual chemistry here? And here's a way you can always tell: if they ask you a personal question. Now, I don't know if it works the same way reversing the genders, because I've only seen it from my own gender, but you could, if you talk to a woman for days and she never asks you, hey, do you have any siblings? Where do you live? Where do you work? There is no interest there. But the moment she says, so, do you have any brothers and sisters? You're done.
So I see. So this is romance detection, but part of the idea here is that usually people have chemistry within seconds, and then you're just, after that, it's just sort of like maneuvering to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, so the biggest skill of romance is identifying somebody who actually likes you. It's not convincing somebody who doesn't to like you. That's a tough sale. I'm not even sure that would be ethical. But certainly identifying somebody who already has, a chemical positive reaction to you is something you could do with hypnosis. And again, that's looking for the micro, changes in their body. You're looking for, do they touch their hair? Are they leaning in? Are they, hanging on your words? Most people would recognize those signs, but hypnotists are just a little bit more trained in watching the smaller, more subtle parts of those signs.
But like asking the personal question back, there, boom, you could take the question off the table.
Yeah, a friend recently had asked me for advice. It's like, hey, somebody somebody seems interested, but, is this real? And I said, well, how often has this person, engaged with you? And it turns out it was a lot. I was like, well, there's your answer. Nobody puts that much energy into something without a genuine interest. So
even though we're trained to be polite and say, hey, how was your day?
The how was your day stuff means nothing. But if somebody wants to stay there and talk to you and find out how you feel and, what's your experience and what you do for a living before this, and that person's interested.
All right. Good to know. Good to know. So, communicating, I mean, that covers a broad spectrum of things, but in general with communicating, you have like some idea in your head you're trying to transmit to somebody else. What's the hypnosis part there?
Well, there are a lot of fields that are related. So after studying hypnosis, in my corporate life, I got to take a lot of classes for free. The company would pay for all kinds of classes. So anything from, negotiating to listening skills, there are a whole bunch of like interpersonal types of skills, and they're all part of communicating. So it's a big topic, but the hypnotist has an advantage in that they can tell when the things they're doing are working, because that's at least half of the skill of a hypnotist is to identify just by looking that what you're doing is working. Is the body responding the way you expect it to?
I feel, because I've been in a lot of different business deals and transactions, and maybe I'm wrong, I've never taken a hypnosis class. I feel in general, I have a good intuition about that, but maybe I'm just smoking my own crack there. Like, I don't think I'm good at anything else, but I feel like I'm good at that sort of detection.
Well, I don't know if everybody thinks they're good. That would be a good study. Does everybody think that they're above average at that?
It's like the driving thing.
Yeah.
Like 9 out of 10 people think they're above average drivers.
Right. And I think we may have talked about this before, but the Dale Carnegie course teaches you how to be more engaging to other people. And the trick summarized is to get them to talk about themselves. So if they just talk about themselves for a while and leave, and you were a good listener and you added a little bit, that person will leave thinking, man, I really like that person, and they won't realize that it's because they did all the talking.
Well, and you mentioned, and I didn't know this until I read your book, you mentioned that Trump as a kid with his parents would go to Norman Vincent Peale's church, who, right on, I guess it's like on 5th Avenue and 28th Street, the Marble Collegiate Church, and he wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, and he basically taught all these principles and kind of interwove it with religion. But I think that's where you feel Trump got his initial persuasion skills as a young boy.
Yeah, Norman Vincent Peale was accused of being a hypnotist in his time because apparently he was so influential, so persuasive, that people thought there's some secret technique here. Now, you notice that The Power of Positive Thinking was essentially how to think your way into success. I'm oversimplifying a book. But if you look at the things that President Trump, and before that, just Trump, did, he was generally imagining this great success in the future. And it was so engaging, he'd paint a picture of it that people would start moving in the direction of the picture he painted. So his certainty, his clarity, and his optimism are just really attractive traits.
And he never backed off on them. I think it's like you say, you praise his consistency even in the face of just nonstop negativity towards him. Like he was able, even just the slogan, "Make America Great." It's simple, it's aspirational. I think you mentioned or I interpret how he mentioned he's speaking a lot personally to people that they can make their lives better, as opposed to the saying, "I'm with her," which doesn't make anyone's life necessarily better.
Yeah, just compare those two slogans, and you can see everything about their persuasive talents. So, "Make America Great Again" works on every level. First of all, every word in it is a positive word. Make, right? It speaks to building, creative. It's like an American word. I'm going to make something, right? Great, again, America. All those words are just really powerful. But when you put them together, they even have a percussion that's pretty good. Make America Great Again. You can almost hear the drum beat. Make America Great Again.
Is again? I feel like that's slightly negative. Like we're down now. Let's get back to again. But of course, there's the callback to Reagan.
Well, it's a callback, but he also had to create contrast. So he needed to say that we're not where we need to be. That was important. And, these other people have ruined everything, but certainly we can be great again. Now, smart people can argue, what the heck does that mean? And weren't we already greater than we've ever been? Yes. I mean, America has never been less great any year than the year before, at least as far as I can tell. But he sold that. He sold the idea that we were somehow greater before, which on any objective measure, I think is just false, right? I mean, you could find areas where we're not as great, perhaps. But overall, he really had to sell that. And I think the again helped a little bit there. But look at one of the Clinton slogans, "I'm with her." Instead of talking about the country and this all banding together, it seemed like she was talking about maybe we should work for her.
Right.
Like, I'm with her. And also the putting the her in it called out that her gender was somehow important to running the country, which a lot of people did not appreciate, even though it was very motivating for people who were, eager to have a woman president.
And we'll talk in a little bit about how when she upped her persuasion game and almost, put up a good battle.
Well, I had surmised that Robert Cialdini was advising the Clinton campaign. Perhaps he had been with Bernie before, because it was only after Bernie dropped out that Clinton got a good persuasion game. And I don't think that was a coincidence. Could have been, but probably not. But when he was asked whether he was consulting through third parties, I heard about this later, I believe his comment was no comment. Now, there's nobody who's not consulting who's going to say no comment. They're going to say, no, I'm not. But that was as close as you could get to a yes for somebody who couldn't say yes in that situation.
Given that he would know that, I mean, kind of everybody knows if they say no comment to a question that means yes. So do you think he just it was a safe way for him to build his brand without admitting that he was doing this?
It might have been the only honest thing to do. If you think about it, what would be another way to answer that?
Well, no, the honest way would be to say, no, I'm not, because then he's honoring his agreement with her.
No, that would just be a lie.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't imagine that he would have been comfortable just lying. I think he needed to just simply not confirm it, and that was as far as he could go. So there was no right answer there once asked.
There's one thing that you talk in the book that's fascinating, and I don't quite know how to do it myself. It seems like it requires a lot of practice. But you mentioned how Trump is constantly doing these linguistic kill shots, like and doing them very visually. So like, crooked Hillary, or I forgot what he said about Jeb. What was the
low energy? Low energy
Jeb. Tiny Marco.
Yeah, little Marco.
Yeah, little Marco. It's very visual. And then also
don't forget sloppy Michael Moore.
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember that one.
That's the new one. That's from just yesterday or the day before. Yeah.
So constructing those seems to be a skill. Like, I don't know. And first off, it's usually an insult. So for me, thinking about them, I don't usually insult people. So I'm trying to. Is there a positive way to use these in persuasion, or is it just always like stop talk? Like, this person is nothing. He's tiny Rubio or whatever.
Well, so there's a lot of engineering in those little nicknames, the linguistic kill shots, as I call them. And here's what you see across all of his nicknames, which is why you know it's not an accident. First of all, he picks a word that is uncommon for the context he's using it, in this case, politics. So calling somebody low energy or lion, lion with an apostrophe instead of a G.
Right.
Little, these are things you don't hear. Crooked. It's just not something that a politician says out loud about another. But the second thing that they have going for them is that they call out a physicality or something that you will be reminded of for sure in the future. So when he said low energy Jeb, before I heard that, I thought, well, Jeb's this calm, cool, collected executive, exactly who you want in an emergency situation. But the moment he said low energy, I called Jeb's, the end of Jeb's campaign, and it turned out it was very soon after. But he never improved after that point, because every time you saw him after that, compared to, and again, this is the power of contrast, because Trump was running such a high energy campaign, and nobody doubted that, you couldn't look at Jeb the same anymore.
But couldn't Jeb say, "Oh my God, pumpkin-headed Trump just called me a bad word," whatever. Like, couldn't people fight? I mean, Trump clearly had physical ways to describe him that would be funny and that would be visual and we would remember.
But look at the thing you're remembering. So people called Trump one of the best. I wish I knew who said it. Maybe you know. Called him Cheeto Jesus.
Oh no, I don't know that.
Right, which is hilarious. And so your first impression is, oh, that's pretty good. It's hilarious. It's an insult. But here's the thing: people like Cheetos. People like their Jesus. You put Cheetos and Jesus together, that's not the insult you were hoping for, right?
So what would have been a kill shot on Trump that I feel like he would have been an easy target for a kill shot.
Well, one of the ones that they tried, at least some operatives tried, was Dangerous Donald and Donald Duck. Those are a few. So the idea behind Donald Duck was that he was ducking on his tax returns and ducking questions and stuff. But Donald Duck is an awesome character that's very popular.
Right.
So it just wouldn't have worked at all. And then Dangerous Donald has the same problem, which is his supporters like him because he's dangerous.
Or what about, and you talk about this a little in the book, but what about Drumpf, which has this Hitler-esque kind of undertone?
Yeah, the whole Drumpf thing, you never saw the professionals use it. That was really a social media thing. And one of the problems is that just looked racist, right? Making fun of somebody's last name, especially specifically because of the ethnic background, in this case, Austrian or whatever it was, it just doesn't feel right. It just feels like something that trolls say on social media, but it could never be a campaign thing.
You can also do the linguistic kill shot to commit suicide. So you mentioned Carly Fiorina in her campaign, and she did this speech about something going wrong in an abortion. So there's this dead baby, and you predicted, okay, that's it for her, and immediately her campaign died because, as you put it, she has suddenly associated herself with a dead baby. Not a good association.
Yeah, and not only is it not a good association,
and it's very visual.
Yeah, very visual, and you might not even be able to conjure up a worse one.
Yeah,
like you can even say ISIS is cutting off people's heads, which is what the president says, but you're still thinking of adults, right? But when you go dead baby, and I even hesitate to even say it in the podcast. It's just so horrible. It's the horrible list.
But okay, let's take that comparison though with Trump saying, ISIS is coming for the Vatican, right? And ISIS cuts off heads. Wasn't Trump doing that a little bit, like with the? And I agree, it's adult, so it's not as bad as a dead baby. But isn't he starting to associate himself?
Yeah. If all you talked about was that stuff, it would be pretty grim. And even if you had good ideas, people would just be worn down by, I can't hear more ISIS terrible things.
But the fear part, though, which as you say is the strongest persuasion factor, you have to bring up ISIS in an election for fear.
With the contrast. So as long as he was offering us, this Make America Great Again vision where things were wonderful and the economy was zooming and ISIS had been defeated. So he was drawing us a picture that was pretty positive. He could mention what's terrible, and then he's created contrast, which is good. But if he lived, and made his brand around the negative stuff, that would have been a mistake. Carly Fiorina really was trying to marry her brand to this topic about abortion. And in so doing, she made maybe one of the biggest political mistakes I've ever seen, which is, she oversold that. She made it too visual, too awful, and didn't have the contrast to offer. She wasn't selling enough positivity.
Well, and this is connected, but you talk about a technique, taking the higher ground, and the way I interpret that is own what people say about you, like absorb it in and throw it back at them in a positive way. So if someone, I don't know, accuses Trump of, being a liar, what would be his way of taking the higher ground?
Well, you already saw me do it, so that's the beauty of it. When we talked about him not passing the fact checking, I acknowledged that.
Right.
But I said that if you can't find an example where he's not persuading in a direction that at least the people who voted for him think is a good idea.
So like if someone said, you're lying about the number of crimes created about immigrants, he could basically turn that around and say, I am saying a lot of horrible things being done by immigrants because this is what's happening. It's happened here, here, here. He could just kind of own it and then, I don't know, just keep going along that thread.
Yeah, I mean, every example is a little bit different. I probably would have gone to, which is why he did, America is the high ground, which is, we'd like, you're right, there's some bad people. There are some bad people coming in.
All right, that's the example you used.
Yeah, most of them are great people. What we'd like to do is get far more of the good people, because the more the better of the good people. But we're just trying to filter out the elements that are not positive for America.
And, one thing that's interesting in all this is that it's like your point, the facts don't matter. It's sort of like for Trump all along, the outcome matters. So I think during a lot of the election, people were sort of wondering, well, what if he wins? How is he going to do all of this? And your point is, it doesn't even matter what he said if the direction is right, because he could just pull back on everything. And then suddenly there is a good chance he's going to please everyone. So the Republicans still see him in the direction he's going. And the Democrats are like, oh, phew, he's not as bad as we thought. That hasn't quite worked out that way, but that's been his technique.
Yeah, the best example of that is during the campaign, when he was saying he wanted to ship back, 10 to 14 million, undocumented Mexicans living in this country. I heard that and said, well, that's not going to happen. That's, his outrageous first offer, like he always makes an outrageous first offer. What he wants is tighter control on the border one way or another, but he will give that up. And sure enough, that was the first thing that came off the table when he got elected, in favor of maybe a little stronger vetting. Maybe we don't feel so bad about a wall, as long as we're not shipping people back. Maybe everybody can stay and they've got some path to something good.
So let's say I forget what year we're in right now, actually. So 2020 comes around and people say, well, you didn't build a wall. What's he going to say?
Well, he's building the prototypes already, and notice how visual they are. All right, we've already seen the place where all the different walls are, and in a way, that's making us think past the sale too. Because if you're thinking which wall do we pick, you're already thinking wall. So, and he does that all the time. He's always making you think about the choice that's after the decision.
I guess that's a good real estate agent technique too, right? They show you a bunch of choices, and they know some of them are bad choices. But as long as you're thinking some choice is a bad choice, you've opened up the possibility that a choice is going to be made.
Well, people who hire a real estate agent, they've already sort of decided they want to buy. So you're really just trying to get them to buy something that's that they can live with and they're happy. And it does help that they see some bad properties first, because then they think their decision is kind of genius by the time they make the decision on the good one, which is more than they wanted to pay. But that's usually what has to happen to get the deal done.
So let's now say, I want to take it to the personal level. Like, let's say you're in a business situation or a romantic situation, and you want to kind of say, something big and then pull back later. What would be examples of this?
Well, you'd have to give me more of a...
Okay, let's say you're selling your company, or let's say you're selling a product.
Well, if you're trying to get a price, you simply say, this product will probably sell 1 billion units next year. Maybe 3 billion, could be 2 billion, but I don't know if it'll be this or our other product. Our other product might get to 1 billion first. I can't tell if this one will be 1 billion or the other one will be 1 billion. So if
this is great anchoring too. By just using these large numbers, right, it kind of puts in their head, even if you were just joking, and it's like you were obviously just joking or lying, and they all know it and we acknowledge it, it still anchors them with those numbers in their head.
So I've also given them an aspiration, because they want to own this company with all that, and I made them think past the sale. Is that, well, which of the products will be the $1 billion one? Which one will make me rich? So there was at least 3 techniques in there.
Huh. And okay, romantic situation. You're on your first date with somebody. And let's not get biological.
Yeah. So you're looking for a big opening offer for a first date. That might be a context where that's not your best approach.
What if you say, I'd love to get married at some point?
well, people run away if you if you get too serious too fast. The thing is, you want people to think that they're making the decision on their own. They're not getting talked into it. They're not being manipulated. They're not being coerced. So if you want to get married, let's say, yeah, I'm not sure there's any good example that works in the romantic context, because anything that looks like too big of an offer would also look too scary.
Okay, let's not make it an offer. What if you said something like, what if you describe to the other person what you're looking for, and you make it these like really aspirational things for yourself, that you want someone who's this, 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 and this. And even though they might be high, do you think that then they're starting to think, okay, well, I somehow fit into this?
Oh, it's can be a real mistake to say, I want this criteria, this one, in a partner if you're talking to the person. Because the odds of you hitting at least one that doesn't sync up is really high. It could be like, I want this, and they have to love music, and the person's thinking, well, I was 3 out of 4. See you later.
Yeah.
That you'll never be happy with my lack of loving music or whatever it is.
I guess so. This is a detection thing. If they say like, well, yeah, I kind of like all those, then that's a good detection thing that they're playing.
Well, the first thing you have to realize is that people go in with their criteria and say, I've got these 10 criteria. But they abandon those criteria so quickly if they find somebody that they just have the right chemistry for, right? If they just smell right. Because, literally how people smell will make you attracted or not, how they look. You walk in and 5 seconds into it, you have a pretty good idea if you want to spend the rest of your life with this person. And, you probably know people who've had that experience. I met so-and-so, and I knew we were getting married. And sure enough, they did.
Unfortunately for me, if I just walk down the street in New York, I have it about 20 times, that feeling. So that's my big problem, which I deal with in therapy all the time. I have all sorts of questions and bookmarks, and I just want to make sure. I didn't understand this one. Your persuasion tip 15. Studies say humans more easily get addicted to unpredictable rewards.
Yeah. So if I gave you a pellet every time you did something, you would just get sort of bored with it. It's like, pellet. Yeah, I like a pellet. And then maybe after a while you'd think, well, I've had a lot of pellets. But let's say this pellet is something you like. But if you did your task and sometimes you got a pellet, but you couldn't tell why you were and why you were not, that would become instantly addictive. And by the way, there's science behind this. This is not Scott's theory. It's a fairly well-known phenomenon that the unpredictability is what makes you keep working for it. It's what makes you gamble, for example. The fact that you don't know when it's going to pay off is very addictive.
But at the same time, I always try to figure out, are these things after the fact theories? Because we just talked about what was great about Trump was his consistency of his simple aspirational message, and his ability to always take the high ground, to own what he said and take the high ground. And yes, he had certain unpredictability in terms of like always trying to say these outrageous statements that would keep him in the media. It was like he was an expert at balancing them, is what you're basically saying.
Well, Trump is a perfect example of this, because if you talk to any of his supporters, they'll give you some version of this story. I like his policies, I like a lot about him, I really supported him. And then he did that thing, or he said that thing, and he just lost me a little bit there. But then next week, he did some things I liked again. So it was the fact that he wasn't consistently always what they wanted, I think, had the perverse effect of making people a little bit more psychologically addicted. Now, I would not recommend that method for a politician. I think it may have worked, just by coincidence. That certainly was not part of his plan. I would not say that was anything he did intentionally.
And I guess also, again, it's related to taking the high ground, because if someone says to him, wait, why did you just say that? He could then say, yeah, I said it because America needs to be great again, and fill in the blanks. You kind of gave his first example of this, which is Megyn Kelly asking him about you've called women fat pigs or whatever, and he then said a funny and visual statement, which he said only Rosie O'Donnell. and that convinced you he was going to be president.
Yeah, that was the first moment when I saw something special, because that was a trap that almost no one could have gotten out of. I mean, just the question itself was toxic, so it shouldn't have mattered how he answered, because the question would be the news. All right. Oh, what, really? He was accused of all these things?
Yeah, because the question's using all of those techniques too. It's visual. It's trying to tie him to all these visual images. That is a very sensitive topic in American politics.
And he did what I've never seen done before in that context. He made his answer so interesting that you forgot the question. And when he said only Rosie O'Donnell, but he also bonded with his audience, because the Republicans were sort of anti-Rosie O'Donnell for political reasons. And so he bonded with them. He got a laugh, which is really good bonding. He looked clever at that moment, and he looked outrageous. He got all the attention, and you just forget the question after a while.
And then I forget what happened at that point. Was that his total answer? Like, did he then give an answer on top of that, or was that just it, his total answer?
Then he went to the high ground, and he said, there's too much political correctness. And again, every Republican in the audience was saying, yeah, there's way too much political correctness. And guess what? That had nothing to do with the question. It was beautiful. It was a high ground, but it wasn't really totally related to the intent of the question. He sort of morphed the question into, well, people say some jokes and they get a little inappropriate. We shouldn't take that as too much. But that really wasn't the intent of the question.
So, and on the same page in the book here, there's something I underline, which I really like, this one technique that you do, which I think I'm going to completely steal, which is you did or do a video series, Coffee with Scott Adams. So you tie people's morning routine. Everybody has a morning routine where they drink coffee, let's say at 8 o'clock. And so now you called this thing Coffee with Scott Adams. So now they're going to watch you while they're drinking coffee. You tied your, whatever it is you want to talk about that day with their morning routine.
Yeah, it's more than that, because coffee is visual, and you also imagine it, you taste it, you smell it, you see it. I mean, you can almost hear it. You can hear the coffee maker doing his thing. So it gets every sense involved. And coffee is one, for those who like it, is an overwhelmingly positive experience. People have a good feeling about coffee if they drink it at all.
And in business, could you say there's a similar technique, which is like, let's say I'm going to call everyone or call my business associates at 8 a.m. Hey, it's Coffee with James Altucher. I'm going to just interrupt your morning routine every day. You're going to hear my voice.
Well, I mean, that has some other variables going in there, the interrupting part.
Oh, because yours is more passive. They have to tune into you.
They have to tune into me.
So it's them associating this rather than you forcing yourself on them.
Yeah, and by the way, because the periscopes are never at the set time, so people are always saying, well, why don't you do them at a set time, or why don't you warn us? And part of the reason is I want to give them unpredictable rewards. So when I'm watching the Periscope, one of the most common things I'll see is somebody will say, thank goodness I finally got a live one. I finally got it, because otherwise they would watch it on replay. And it makes them feel really good that they got this reward that was completely unpredictable. Yeah,
but if you call it Coffee with Scott Adams, though, aren't you doing it roughly at the same time every day, or do you just vary by like 10 minutes, 15 minutes here and there?
It's just any time in the morning when I feel like it, and then I might do a few in the afternoon just because.
And so you combine associating with this routine with the unpredictability. It seems like it's again one of it reminds me again of like swinging a tennis racket, where there's like all these things you have to remember that when you're used to it, after you've done it 1,000 times, it becomes easy. It's just you don't even think about it. But at first, it's like, oh, hold your hand like this, hold your knees like this. There's so many things you think of in the head. You do it poorly.
Yeah, well, people ask me, does Trump consciously use these methods? And my answer is, first of all, I can't get in his head, so I don't want to, pretend I have magic powers to know what he's thinking. But I'll use my own example. Once you learn these things, they just become the way you communicate. You don't actually think, well, now I'm going to do this trick, now I'm going to do this trick, now I'm going to do this trick. You just know what's more persuasive. So, for example, I will just sort of reflexively talk in visual language whenever I can, but I don't really think about it. It's just better communication.
And I keep thinking about that, like, how do you, like, it seems like that's a hard skill. Like it's almost like you have to practice that a lot. Like, how do you talk in visual? I don't really think too much in visual language. So how would you use this in daily life?
Well, you would use it just by talking about anything visual. Anytime you wanted people to feel a certain way, you would give them the visual image that brought them there.
Like, give me an example when you've done it.
Well, the coffee with Scott Adams thing is one example. That's the hardest question. Give me an example.
I know, and I feel like it's like I had last week. Sheila Evans came on, and she's done 1,700 documentaries, and it's sort of like I even regretted it the second I asked her, "What's your favorite documentary?" She said 1,700 documentaries. So it's a stupid question. I don't know. I just asked it anyway. I ask you this though because I'm just trying to think, like in my daily life, where would I use visual language?
Well, so here's a small example. So one of my cartoon characters is the boss, and I use a hypnosis technique where I don't give him a name. I also don't tell you what company Dilbert's working at, and I leave a lot for the reader to fill in. But I usually refer to the boss as the pointy-haired boss because you just now think of his two tufts of pointy hair, and that just brings you to that image and makes you remember him. So he's one of the more popular characters, and probably some of that has to do with the fact that he's the pointy-haired boss. So it's automatically visual.
So I guess let's say we're going to a party with some friends, and then you're talking about it later with your friends. You could just describe everyone visually, and chances are you're the life of the after party because they'll remember everyone who you talked about.
Yeah, every story is better with a little visual as long as you don't bore your audience with, and the junipers were in season,
And it sounds like it's good not to be so specific also.
Well, you want to leave out details when the details could be either a distraction
Dividing.
or it would allow somebody to change their mind. Yeah. So you want to give them just enough and never more. It's very similar to selling past the close. So if you've heard that phrase. So as an example would be if I'm trying to sell you this bottle of water and you say, all right, I'll buy it. And as we're walking to the cash register for you to purchase it, I say, this is one of the 3 best bottles of water that you could buy. And then you say, what are the other 2? And now I've lost the sale. So you want to give no information after the sale is done. And in Persuasion, you don't want to add anything that isn't helping you. If it's extra, leave it out.
You don't mind I go through and my bookmarks, right?
I like how many dog-eared pages you have there.
Yes.
That's a good sign.
So we did the linguistic kill shots. I liked how, when he was being accused of being a racist, you predicted he was going to start taking photos with kissing babies who were of all sorts of different minorities,
Right.
and which he did.
Yeah, so this is a perfect example of the visual power. So by calling the president a racist, which was really good politics, it was a very effective attack. The best thing he could do is to give a visual contradiction to that. And if you're physically touching the people that people say you must hate, it's hard for the brain to wrap around that he could have these feelings they imagine, which, by the way, I'm sure he does not have, and yet could be so physically affectionate with the very people that you imagine he hates his guts somehow. So there was strong persuasion to just go out there and kiss some babies and make sure that there were a lot of African-American babies in the bunch.
And we were talking earlier how a lot of these persuasion techniques can work well one-on-one. A lot of them can work on a mass audience where you only need to sway 2 or 3%, and persuasion techniques will do that. But now Trump is in this weird middle ground. President Trump is in this weird middle ground where he has to persuade a smaller group of people to work with him, which is Congress. And he does seem to have not done that as well as he's done the election.
I would agree that he is less successful persuading Congress so far. But if you take the example of health care, for example, as soon as he acted like a standard president, where he said, hey, Congress, give me a bill and I'll sign it. I don't even care too much what it is. Come up with a good bill and I'll sign it. That failed miserably. There was almost no persuasion technique used there. He was just acting like hey, I got a job. This is my job. I'll do my job. But now watch what happened after it failed. And by the way, I always wondered if he didn't make it fail intentionally, because that would give him flexibility. So by allowing the Republicans to do their most Republican plan, scaring the left to death that this plan might be, adopted, he now had the right failing publicly, while the left is scared to death. It's the perfect setup to find the middle. And what does he do? Hey, Chuck and Nancy, maybe I'll deal with you. If the Republicans can't do it, maybe I'll talk to the Democrats. And by the way, I think he means that, because he just wants a deal. What's good for him, what's good for the country is something that makes sense, and it probably won't come from 100% of one party making a decision. So he has failed his way to a better negotiating situation, which is not that different from what he talks about all the time about being able to walk away from the table. Right? You're not going to get the good deal unless you can walk away from the table.
What about with something like tax reform, which is kind of the next big domestic issue that's going to come up?
Tax reform is going to be really tough because the economy is doing well. And when the economy is doing well, it's hard to sell somebody on the let's change something important. Right?
I feel like you're saying a fact, and facts don't matter.
Well, no, this is how people feel. If people feel that they're secure and things are going the way they want, they don't want to add risk. All right, and any big change to a tax plan is going to look like introducing risk. So he's got to convince people that this is not risky and is just going to work in their favor. And you also have the problem that no matter what plan you come up with, the other side is going to say, well, there you go again, screwing the middle class. It wouldn't matter what it was. It's always going to look, or at least you can make the case, that the middle class is going to pay. And part of that is because it's going to be complicated stuff. So if they come up with a plan that says, well, we're going to lower your rate, but we're going to take away these deductions, the public is going to say, I don't know what that does to me. I don't know.
Well, let's say he is focused on just like kind of a tax-oriented easing monetary policy. He could say something like, we're booming, and unless you want the shanty towns of 1930s depression, we need to further loosen economic policy, and this is the best way to do it. Let's have less taxes on the middle class.
It's a tough sell when things are going well, because that you can do dramatic things when everything's broken. And people say, well, we've tried everything. Let's try this new thing. But selling into a stable system that's growing at 3% GDP is the hardest sale you could ever make. Now, they might be able to do it simply by confusing people so that people don't quite know how it's going to work out. But that doesn't seem like good policy to me. My guess is that probably both parties need something to happen. So maybe it'll be a little business relief, maybe something on the estate tax. But it would be hard for me to imagine a major change that affected individuals and also made some individuals' taxes go up, because necessarily changes do that. It's hard for me to imagine that will be successful.
And then on a foreign policy board, as we've talked about before, Hillary Clinton's persuasion game kind of almost equalized things in the summer when, she was basically saying, do you want Donald Trump's, hands on the nuclear codes? And, she sort of messed up by letting, the whole Billy Bush thing kind of take over, which was a weaker story in the long run. But now here we are in that story. So he's got Rocket Man, a visual description of, the North Korean leader. But there's real issues here, like something bad can happen. Do you personally get worried about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here, within the strike range of North Korea. So it would be irrational not to be worried. And I guess it's irrational both ways. But this is the first time we've seen something that looked like it could work. In the past, we've seen, hey, let's make some promises that you won't keep. And that was the whole game. Let's make some promises, you won't keep them, all right. And then they have more nuclear ability next year. This is the first time that I'm sure that Little Rocket Man is thinking to himself, am I going to be dead in a month? because I think the president has sold him, and Mad Dog Mattis as well, that this time is different. Now, whether or not this time really is different is separate from the fact that I think everyone believes it, right? And when you've got him thinking, I might be dead within the month, like actually, you think that Little Rocket Man is probably thinking, am I going to be dead in a month? Because if he's not thinking that, he's not watching the news. And that should loosen him up. And the other thing that's loosened him up to negotiate a little bit. Now, that wouldn't be enough because he has real interests about, protecting his country and his ego and his standing in the world and all that. But I think it's the first time that the economic pressure looks like it's to the death, meaning that it doesn't matter how much economic pressure it takes. Trump's just going to keep his foot on the throttle until they're gone. So they might have a nuclear weapon and nothing else. I think he would. I think he sold them on the fact that you'll just ruin them economically, and they won't have anything worth winning.
Yeah, because if you look at the history of it, him, his father, whatever, they keep having this sort of these pseudo threats from North Korea, and then whether it's W or Obama or everybody backs off. Like in America, we kind of make a deal, and then there's no more nuclear troubles for a while. And Trump's like not backing off. He's playing the game a little differently than Obama and W did.
Yeah, in the past, we thought, okay, North Korean leader, he's crazy. So if we can get any kind of a deal that looks rational, let's take that deal.
Then it just kicks the can.
Yeah. And now they're thinking, oh my God, the United States is crazy. Maybe we should talk because the alternative is not looking so good. So there's no way to predict these things. And if there's a nuclear war, I'm going to say I was so wrong. But I think it's the first time that there's a real opportunity for negotiating, but we're probably not there yet. I think the economic sledgehammer has to do its work for, I don't know, it might be another 9 months.
Just a couple more questions, but I do want to mid-advertise that this book, Win Bigly, is great not only to understand the election that we just went through, but also I think just personally, this is like a great toolkit to start with to learn how to use to understand the world around you in terms of persuasion as opposed to facts and rationality. I think that if all you get out of it is just that, hey, facts don't matter, but persuasion does, I think that's very valuable because then it starts you thinking in a different way.
Yeah, I tried. My last book was about how to persuade yourself towards success, basically an internal persuasion, if you will. And this one's about how to influence other people. So it's a different set of tools. And I wrap it in the election story because everybody's familiar with that. So they have a common reference. Makes it fun.
But I'm curious now, like, let's say Mark Cuban was listening to this and he's thinking of running for president in 2020. What should he start thinking about in terms of his persuasion arsenal? Because he's never been as effective as Donald Trump at this.
Yeah. So I heard that he said that if he ran, he would try to run as a Republican, which I hope is just persuasion because Republicans have long memories and his support for Clinton, I think, would doom him on the Republican side. But let's say he ran as a Democrat. We already saw some very clever high ground persuasion come out of him in a recent interview, in which the question was, well, if you do these things for the social programs, how can you possibly pay for it? It's the impossible question. Everybody wants to cut taxes and everybody wants to give everybody great, programs for free, but nobody knows how to pay for it. And he's the first one who said, and this is classic high ground maneuver, that he would use technology to try to lower the cost of these things. He was talking about healthcare in particular. But that's the first time you've heard that from a politician. And immediately you go to, well, that actually makes sense. In fact, I've said it myself. It's the only way you're going to get to a future where we have the stuff we want. You can't get there by taxing. The just math will never work. You have to figure out how to live a quality life at a reasonable cost. And we're at a point in civilization where technology has that promise. It never did before. I mean, not to the degree it does now. But I think we're at a place where we're probably a few years away from being able to build like a really livable house for $100,000 that just is a great place to live, not just settling for the small house, just way better than even a big house.
So he could kind of portray himself as kind of this technological savior. And how can he? What's a good linguistic kill shot on Trump there to say Trump's not that?
Well, here we're imagining he's running against Trump, which I think if Trump has a great 4 years, he'd be tempted to go out on top. And I would actually probably advise him to, if he asked, which he won't. Again, partly because of age too.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to gamble on the age thing, because if you start losing a step, that's what people are going to remember instead of the good 4 years. So I don't think he'll be running against Trump, because I think Trump is more likely to do a good 4 and then out. But if he did, Trump has that anti-fragile problem where you can throw anything at him and he transfers it into energy and somehow he comes out ahead. So I think Cuban would have to maybe use his technological advantage and say he knows more about technology. Everybody would believe that. Like, there would be no dispute on that question. And he could say, all right, I'll give it to him. I'm just kind of thinking on the spot here. He could say, things are going pretty well. Thank you, Donald Trump. But you can't take us to the next level.
It's not quite visual, though.
Well,
next level, I guess, is levels.
Well, we're just starting here. So, and then the components can be visual. You could say, for example, we'll have robots building houses. We'll have self-driving cars. So you can describe that world that we're not at, but under his leadership you could get to.
Right. So he can say all these extreme statements like we're going to have Wi-Fi everywhere, and everything's going to be shipped to you by drones, and
if he were running as a Democrat, he could say, I'm going to give you, we're going to work toward universal health care. We don't know how to get there. That's the problem we have to solve, and technology is how we're going to solve it. And I'm the right guy to do that. We don't know how to give everybody social services. We don't know how to get everybody a job who needs a job and the training to get a job, but they're all technology fixes. And I could help do that within the constraints of capitalism, right? It's not going to be the government doing things. We just shine a light where it needs to be shined and make sure that, capitalism is doing what it does best.
And so, final question or set of questions, where do you use these persuasion techniques, let's even say on a daily basis? You described a little bit how you use it with Dilbert, and you've been doing that for years, and you described how it's kind of almost instinctual now, like you talk in a visual language, you're always thinking about all these different aspects. But what are concrete ways you can see that it's helped you recently having persuasion techniques?
Well,
and obviously your rise in social media and as a political commentator was part of that.
Yeah, I mean, look how hard it is to change fields, and so dramatically.
Right, like we haven't even talked about cartooning.
Right. So the hardest sell is, how do you convince somebody that you're not what you've been for decades, or that you have more to offer? So I came in through sort of the side entrance by talking about persuasion,
which I think is a very good technique. I think people underestimate the back door or the side entrance.
So one of the things I learned about the media and what makes news and what makes people care is they don't really care that you're doing something that people do, but you're doing it really well, right? Unless you're full Tiger Woods or something, right? But if you're just doing what people do really well, there's no news story there. But if you do it a different way, in this case, I'm talking about politics, but I'm talking about persuasion. That was a different way. That's immediately gets people's attention, and they say, oh, a new thing. Finally, there's a new thing. Let's talk about the new thing.
And so for you, what was news was that the Dilbert guy is saying Donald Trump's going to win. You made an outlandish statement as the Dilbert guy.
I did use the technique of being wrong, and at least the thing I predicted seemed so wrong to people that it was hard to ignore.
Right, and you used the technique of either way it would win for you, because if obviously what happened was Donald Trump won, so now you're world famous political commentator. Or if Donald Trump had lost, you still would have had an outlet to say he's using these persuasion techniques and then he failed in these persuasion levels. You still would have kind of branded yourself somewhat as a persuasion expert.
Well, that certainly would have been a far worse outcome because I think I would have been mocked for the rest of my life. And even though, there are some events that are outside of anybody's control, right? If he had been in a traffic accident or something, he could have lost. So yeah, I took a pretty big risk there. And
But I feel like you balanced it though. Like you were always able to pull back, like the way you're when the Billy Bush thing happened and you threw your support to Gary Johnson, you had ways of like pulling back just the same way Trump pulls back from the outlander statements.
Well, yeah, I tried to make people understand that it wasn't about the policies because that would be the hardest thing to pull back from. Mm-hmm. And I've always been fiercely independent about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense politically. But the other thing that I like, and I think we've talked about this in another conversation another day, about how for a writer, what people like is to feel risk. They want to feel danger. Even if it's just, oh my God, I can't believe this author said that, because when next time he sees his family, they're going to know that he said that in his book. How's that going to be? So if you don't smell some kind of danger in the writing, it just sort of sits there on the page. You just say, that's interesting. But if you see that the author or somebody that is part of the story is in danger and there's a real risk there, automatically your mind goes to it.
We haven't spoken specifically about that, but you spoke about something related to that, which is that a writer should often take both sides of an issue, of a controversial issue. Like, for instance, take abortion. And I've done this recently in an article just to try out your idea. If you take both the pro-life side and the pro-choice side, everyone's going to hate you.
Yeah.
Because how can you either the fetus is alive or it isn't? So how can you take both sides of this issue? And there's lots of issues like that. Like climate change is another issue like that. Where and that's where the danger lies, I guess, in discussing those, taking both sides of those issues.
Yeah, some people say that if you can't explain the other side, you don't understand your side. It's sort of a baseline to know if you're just talking nonsense. If you can't really explain the other person's point of view, you don't really have a point of view that's worth listening to.
And so now, finally, I want to ask, so I've been attempting to do stand-up comedy. I go up 3 to 6 times a week on a stage, and usually nobody in the audience knows me. Maybe there's 50 to 150 people in the audience. And the most important skill is not humor. You can have all the funny jokes in the world, but if they don't like you in those first 5 to 10 seconds, they're not going to laugh at a single joke, no matter how funny it is. So if you were giving advice to me, which I guess is what I'm asking for, what would you do to increase your chances of likability walking up onto a stage in those first 5 to 10 seconds?
I think if you're new, it helps to be as much like them as you can. In other words,
I'm never going to look like them.
Well, but you probably dress, in a way that they dress. You may be, in their demographic in most cases. They're people in New York, probably a certain age group. So that helps. You don't want to go into a completely hostile audience.
Well, it's funny. When I used to wear just, let's say, white button-down shirts, not as good as when I wore a plaid shirt, because the audience is an everyman.
Yeah. And when I used to do a lot of essentially stand-up comedy, but it was, talking about Dilbert for big corporate groups, none of which I do now that I've talked about Trump. I lost all of that business. But one of the things I would do is I would dress poorly. Now, I've never been, one who could dress well, but I would actually go out of my way to make sure that I was one of the more poorly dressed people at the event. And part of that was that it matched what people thought of me through my character, Dilbert, who would be a poorly dressed person too. So it was kind of it all fit in their minds. It's like, oh, poorly dressed, he's got a comic that's poorly dressed. They're already primed by just being poorly dressed. But that's, sort of a special case. So I think that how you dress has to do with the audience and the situation and stuff. But being less formal than they are is probably good when you're new. later you can be Jerry Seinfeld and put on the tuxedo, and people say, well, of course he's in a tuxedo. That's Jerry Seinfeld. So, you could get there someday.
And so okay, poorly dressed. I'm pushing for more.
Well, your first few things that you say are going to really control the audience. So you notice that people usually start with just some connection.
Yeah, like where are you from, or they do self-deprecation.
Well, they look at the audience and they actually make eye contact with the audience, and they're trying to, they might say something about, some little non-joke about themselves or the situation or what's happening or where you're all together here. So there's a little bit of bonding going on.
Yeah, a little tribe building.
Stand-up comedy is not my field, so I would say, even though I've done it, but I did it in a special context. It was easy for me because I was just talking about Dilbert, and people were primed to like that. I suppose the reason that so few people can do that, be a good stand-up, is that I think there's something in people. Like, I think there's some people that you could give the best jokes in the world, and the moment you saw them, you couldn't laugh. Like, there are some people who are just serious looking, and you've got a unique look, right? You've got the hair is not like other people's hair, and blah blah. So that fits perfectly into that comedy world. The number of comedians who have unusual hair is probably pretty big.
No, I'll tell you what I do, and I wonder if it fits into any of the persuasion stuff. What I'll do when I get on the stage, I've been doing this lately. I've been experimenting with it. I may not do it for that much longer, but I'll go up. I'll just look at the audience. I'll usually be wearing a jacket. I'll take off my jacket. I'll put it down. I'll put water on the floor. I'll unbutton my shirt. I'll say, I won't be saying anything, but I'll have like a t-shirt underneath. I'll take the water up. I'm still not saying anything. I'll drink water, just look around at the audience. So now it's like 20 seconds in, and then I'll say something like, what, you don't take your time when you get to work? And, you don't take your time settling in when you get to work? And usually by then, if they laugh, I know I've controlled the stage and the situation.
Yeah, being silent for as long as you are is pretty powerful. As long as you don't have silence later, but if it's a focus point, that's pretty powerful. I would say you want to look for. Your example was perfect because even as you're talking, I was trying to think of an example, and you gave me one. Your very first thing you said was, "I'm like you."
Yeah.
You take your time to get ready in the audience. Yeah. You could go up there and say, well, I just need my cup of coffee and I'll be in the men's room for 10 minutes and, I'll be out to start my day. Actually, that would be a perfect starting joke. Would be everybody has if they work in an office, they know that person who spends way too much time in the bathroom, and they're counting that as their time on the clock. So a joke like that, at your own expense, people would say, I know that guy. And then you're right with them.
I'll tell you the one time the silence trick didn't work is when usually I won't go to the microphone until after I've said that first line. But one time I went to the microphone first and then said that first line, and then it didn't work at all. Because the microphone made me above them instead of with them.
But you also surprised them by showing that all that stuff they thought was not part of the act was actually part of the act. And then they had to reconstruct it. So one of the things that makes a joke really work is if somebody has to work to construct it in their heads. You give them almost enough, but they put the parts together themselves. That's what people really get triggered by.
Well, Scott Adams, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's third time on the podcast, first time in person. I hope we get a chance to do it again. And I really think everybody should read Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. This is not just only about the election. I think this is going to make my life better reading this book. So I've got all sorts of stuff like underlined and marked. Oh, it actually just reminded me. So I bookmarked this. Why is turn the other cheek one of the most persuasive 4 words ever?
Well,
and I promise this will be the last question.
So I believe the original context was instead of fighting people, use persuasion. I mean, because turning the other cheek was, there's actually more of a historical context. It meant something in the actual biblical sense. But it was a move from either being a victim or fighting back physically. It was the third way. And the third way was persuasion. By turning the other cheek, they went to the high ground. They became another person. It was unexpected. It was persuasion.
Huh. All right. Well, thanks, Scott. Win bigly. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey. Hold on. Before you go, don't forget I'm giving out for free whatever copies I have left of the Side Hustle Bible. Again, I'm not publishing this on Amazon. I'm just giving it to you guys, podcast listeners, newsletter subscribers, and the people who have already been interested in my writing, because I know you'll appreciate it. I know we're all interested in freedom and choosing ourselves, and I've put together this collection of 177 proven ideas that I know work. I mean, wait till you see the testimonial from the guy who wrote the foreword. It blew my mind when he wrote it. So if you've ever wondered what life would be like if you were able to make money while you slept, or while you were spending time with your family, or wonder what it would be like to turn something you love into a new income stream, or even find out what you love that you could monetize, you need this book because I wrote it for you. You can get it right now at jamesfreebooks.com. That's jamesfreebooks.com to claim your free copy of the Side Hustle Bible. Do it now. It's jamesfreebooks.com.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.